Good evening. Thank you for joining. This is the Central LA Community Meeting for the City of Los Angeles Assessment of Fair Housing. Please note that we will be recording the meeting this evening, and the recording may possibly be shared at a later time on the city's website. Before we get into the meeting, there are a few things I need to let you know. We have Spanish interpretation available, and everyone participating in the meeting will need to select the language that they'd like to participate in. You can do that by finding the interpretation button on the bottom of your screen. It looks like a globe. If you'll click that, it will allow you to choose between English and Spanish. And we also have a sign language interpreter with us this evening, and you can choose to see the ASL interpretation using that same interpretation button on the bottom of your screen. And additionally, the meeting tonight is going to be closed captioned. And so if you would like to be able to view the captions, you can click, there's a link in the chat, and it will take you to a stream text site where you will be able to read along with the captions. So I'm going to pause here for a moment just to give everyone a chance to select their language and to find the stream text link in the chat if you would like to access those captions. And while I give you a moment to do that, I'll just repeat again. There's an interpretation button that you'll find at the bottom of your screen. Looks like a globe. You see it circled on the slide in front of you. Everyone will need to select a language to participate in this evening. So click that interpretation button, choose between English and Spanish. Also, if you would like ASL interpretation, you can make that selection there as well. There's a link in the chat to a stream text site where you can follow along with the captions. And on that note, I would also add, because we do have interpreters working with us this evening, it would be very helpful when we get to discussion portions of the meeting if you would speak slowly, just so that our interpreters are able to capture what you're saying. A couple of other notes about how we will use Zoom in our meeting tonight. When we have opportunities for questions or discussions, you can use the raise hand button to signal that you would like to speak. So to find that, you'll click on reactions, also a button on the bottom of your screen. And from there, you can choose raise hand. So again, reactions, raise hand. You can control your audio and video using the mute and start video buttons. You can also share questions or ideas throughout the meeting using the chat feature. We do encourage you, however, to, as much as you're able to, participate verbally in the meeting. That way, the comments or the questions or the ideas that you share can be interpreted for others who are speaking a different language. But the chat is available to you also, and we would invite you to use the chat too. We will try to answer any questions that you ask here tonight in the meeting. But if there are questions we aren't able to answer for you tonight, again, using the chat, if you'll leave us some contact information there, we would be happy to follow up with you by email after the meeting. And for those of you joining us by phone, you can use *6 on your phone. That will toggle between mute and unmute. You can hit *9 to raise your hand. So those are, I'll repeat those again when we get to the discussion portion, but those are the commands that you have to mute, unmute, and raise your hand from the phone. And finally, one last note, we will be doing some live polling at a few different points during tonight's meeting using a site called slido.com. That's SLIDO.com. You may want to go ahead and open up a new browser tab and go ahead and travel to that slido.com site, just so that you have it pulled up and ready when we get to that portion of the meeting. If you don't have a chance to do that right now, that's fine. We'll get to that a little later. But just if you want to be prepared, it's Slido, SLIDO.com. And then there's a code that you'll put in to access our meeting, and that code is 3606379. And that information is in the chat for you now too. So again, thank you, and we'll get started with some introductions here.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us. My name is Nancy Tuamaklaboa, and I'm with the Los Angeles Housing Department, also known as LAHD. This project, an assessment of fair housing, or AFH, will analyze the fair housing landscape in the city of Los Angeles. Essentially, looking at whether all residents are able to access housing that is suitable for them, free from unlawful discrimination. It will also look at whether the areas where people live impact their ability to access different community resources and opportunities. These types of studies are required by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development for any city or county that receives HUD grants for community development or affordable housing. Additionally, as of 2018, the state of California also requires public agencies, including cities, counties, and housing authorities, to prepare fair housing assessments. The City of Los Angeles Housing Department will be leading the development of this study in partnership with the Housing Authority of the City of Los Angeles, also known as HACLA. So in addition to myself tonight, we also have other staff from LHD who are represented here. So I'll let them introduce themselves now.
Hi, everyone. This is Joel Montano with the Los Angeles Housing Department. Happy to be here with you all tonight, and I'll pass it to Maya.
Hello, Maya Abood. Happy to be here with you, also in the policy unit at LAHD. I'll pass it to Micah.
Hi, I'm Mike O'Brien. Happy to be here. I'm also in the policy unit. I think that might be everyone from LHD.
Yes, thank you. And we also have staff from HACLA. So Patty and Norma, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, this is Patricia Mendoza. I'm the Assistant Director with Section 8. I will pass it to Norma.
Hi, I'm Norma Rosas, and I'm the ombudsperson for Section 8 Special Programs.
Thank you. LHD and HACLA are working with Mosaic Community Planning, a consulting firm, to assist us in the research and development of the city study. Members of Mosaic's team are here now, so I'll turn it over to them to introduce themselves.
Hi, good evening. I'm Jeremy Gray. I'm a principal of Mosaic and will be facilitating the meeting this evening.
Hi, I'm Melissa Mayu, also a principal with Mosaic.
Hi, I'm Madison Hughes with Mosaic, and I will be taking notes and providing links and other info in the chat.
Great, thank you. If there's a need to break out into breakout rooms, then once we get to that discussion section, you'll also see some of these folks facilitate in smaller breakout groups. If you'd like to contact any of the team about the AFH, you can email lahd.afhpolicy@lacity.org. This email address will be placed in the chat box for reference. You can also send a message there if you have additional input after tonight or would like to be added to an email list for updates about the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. So one of the most important aspects of the AFH is hearing from local residents and other stakeholders about the needs that you see related to fair housing and access to opportunity in LA. Having this on-the-ground perspective from many different people who are living and working in the city every day is crucial. We'll give an overview now of fair housing and the AFH process so that everyone has an understanding of the topics we'll be talking about. But most of the meeting time tonight will be a chance for us to hear from you. Your input will help identify priority fair housing issues and their causes, and it will shape the goals and strategies that the city and HACLA leaders adopt. So it's very important that we hear your perspectives, and we'll talk more about ways you can stay involved with the project at the end of the meeting. So now, as we get started, I mentioned we would be doing some polling. And we're going to start with a poll here that will allow us to hear some about what you like best about your neighborhood. This is a helpful question just to get us started and to give us a frame of reference for our further discussion. So you can share your ideas by going to slido.com. That's going to go into the chat again, slido.com. And then you're going to enter code 3606379. And you also see a QR code on the screen. You can use that to get there as well. And so once you get to that screen, so I already see some answers going in. People like their neighborhood because it's close to everything, it's safe and clean. And as you type your answers in, you're going to see those continue to populate on the screen in the form of a word cloud. You can enter more than one answer if you'd like. There may be a few things you like about your neighborhood, so please, you can add them all in there. And the more times a particular word is mentioned, the larger you're going to see that represented in the word cloud. So I'm going to pause here just for a minute to give you all a chance to find that site and to enter your responses. And we'll take a look at them together. So now you can see walkable has been mentioned by more than a person or two because it's showing up larger. So a lot of people like that their neighborhood is walkable. That's a good one. A couple of others that I'm seeing, lots of trees and shade, access to transit. In addition to walkable, we have walkability. So those, I think, go together. Close to everything. A couple of people have mentioned that now as well. And I see, I think we're still getting some responses. I see a couple of people who are still typing into the response tab. Access to transit, so that's another one. There are also some things in here just kind of about the feel of the neighborhood. So someone mentioned community, someone mentioned friendly. So we're getting some things about kind of the amenities that exist in the neighborhood. Physical types of things, but also some responses that relate to neighbors and just how you feel about the neighborhood that you live in. And that's helpful to know as well. I think we still have some people participating, and that's great. I want you to continue to do that. As we're doing that, though, I'll invite, would anybody like to unmute and share what you typed in and why you selected that or why you provided that answer? Seeing some new things here. Convenience, bike lanes, I think that's a new one. Access to stores, close to businesses. I think those kind of go along with close to everything. So I don't know, maybe somebody who said that they like their neighborhood because of its proximity to businesses, stores, or everything. A few of you said that. Would anybody who answered in that vein like to, you can raise your hand to indicate you'd like to share, but to talk more about why you selected that, or maybe why those things are important to you.
Whoop, I see a hand there.
Yes, hi.
Hello, my name is Sarah Pia and I'm with the mayor's office. Thank you so much for this webinar and this interactive poll. I was happy to see a lot of like transit answers and walkability. I'm one of the people who said like I live close to everything. I live in the valley. And I feel like everything from like grocery stores to parks and whatnot are close. But I would like to preface that by saying I think it is close by car, but not necessarily walkable. So that's one thing that I would like to see improvements in, like with Metro and everything. So thank you.
Great, thank you. I appreciate you making that distinction. Maybe for those of you who talked about your neighborhood being walkable, I guess I'm interested, is that because it's dense enough that there are things close enough that you can walk to them? Or is the quality of sidewalks a component of that? What else goes into that walkability that's important to you?
Don't see any hands, Jeremy.
Okay. Okay. Well, thanks for keeping an eye on that. I think I really like the picture that has emerged, and I think it's great that all of you who have participated have had, something good, things that you like about your neighborhood. And I think the picture that it paints is a nice one. We'll have a chance to talk more about your neighborhood too, and maybe more about things that you feel like your neighborhood is lacking or needs. But I think this is a helpful starting point for us. So thank you again for everybody who took time to share your ideas there in Slido. We know that having access to resources and a safe and clean environment is an important aspect of fair housing. And it's one, like I said, that we will talk more about. At this point, though, we will have a brief overview of fair housing law, and then we'll follow that up with a little more discussion. Generally, when we talk about fair housing, we're talking about everyone's right to participate in the housing market, to own, sell, purchase, or rent housing of their choice without fear of unlawful discrimination. And that includes things like renting or buying a home, obtaining homeowners insurance, having access to housing loans, and having fair property appraisals. Under the Fair Housing Act, everyone is protected from housing discrimination based on race or ethnicity, color, religion, national origin, sex, which includes sexual harassment, familial status, meaning families with children, and disability status, and that includes both mental and physical disabilities. We refer to these as protected classes because people are protected from housing discrimination based on these characteristics or classes. Along with the Fair Housing Act, many states have additional protections, and the state of California has a series of laws that expand fair housing protections to include several more protected classes, and you can see those listed here. They include marital status, age, ancestry, immigration status, language, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, genetic information, veteran or military status, occupation, and any other arbitrary factors. The state also protects people from discrimination based on their source of income, and that includes the use of Section 8 housing choice vouchers or other similar types of housing assistance. So as you can see, you have considerable additional fair housing protection under California laws. And here we have a few examples of actions that would be considered illegal discrimination if they're based on protected class. Examples include telling someone that a house is not available for rent or sale when it really is, or denying mortgage loan applications based on protected class. Landlords or lenders cannot apply different terms to a lease or loan based on protected characteristics. So, for example, a landlord could not charge a higher security deposit or a higher rent to a family with children than to a household without kids. A property manager also couldn't steer families with children to one part of an apartment development. And real estate agents cannot steer home buyers or limit showings to certain neighborhoods based on protected class. Refusing to make reasonable accommodations for people with disabilities and refusing to accept Section 8 housing choice vouchers are also examples of discrimination that you might see in your community. So while this is not a complete list of ways that housing discrimination is present, it does illustrate some of the ways it may happen beyond just refusing to rent or sell housing to someone. In 2015, HUD adopted a new fair housing rule called Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing, or we'll call it AFFH. That rule called on cities to take a more critical look at the role of housing in their communities. The AFFH rule requires cities to look at access to community resources and opportunities. Things like good schools, good jobs, transit, grocery stores, healthcare facilities, and a clean environment. Cities need to consider whether everyone has equal access to neighborhoods with these types of opportunities, regardless of their race, ethnicity, or any other protected class. The AFFH rule also requires cities to take meaningful actions to overcome patterns of segregation and to create communities that are inclusive for everyone. Cities must work to reduce affordable housing needs and other barriers that limit access to opportunities and resources. As Nancy mentioned earlier, in 2018, the state of California has its own affirmatively furthering fair housing law. And that requires all cities and counties to assess fair housing as part of their housing elements. So this is a requirement now at both the federal and the state level. Thinking about topics like this, so fair housing, affordable housing, being able to access resources in your community, I'm interested to know what types of needs do you see in your community? We'll use Slido here again. That information just went back into the chat again, so you have it handy, but it hasn't changed from before. So you should just be able to flip over to that tab if you still have it open. But our question here is, what fair or affordable housing needs do you see in your community? Do you feel like there is enough housing for seniors, for example, for large families, for people with disabilities? Is there enough affordable housing for people with low incomes? Do people have fair access to housing? So please take a moment, find the slido.com page. The code is 3606379, and you can type your responses in there. For this one, instead of a word cloud, it's going to generate a list. And so it will eventually scroll off the screen. But all of the responses that you're entering, we are going to be able to capture those, even if it falls off the bottom after a few more people respond here. But let's take a look at these as they're coming in. So more housing at all levels, affordable housing units for large households. Another response here, housing for larger families, moderate income housing needs. There's a comment here about the legacy of redlining in their communities. Multifamily affordability upon vacancy, yearly rent increases, permanent supportive housing, different types of affordable units. So maybe they're meaning a variety of housing types is important. More family housing, senior and independent housing, landlords not keeping their properties maintained and making timely repairs is something that someone has mentioned. We still have people participating, and so there's more responses coming in, but as those do, I'll stop here again and would like to give a chance for some of you who have been responding to share aloud some of your reasons. So would anybody like to raise their hand and maybe comment on maybe some comments that you've seen your neighbors type in, or maybe a comment that you made yourself that you would like to add some context to? I see Tabitha's hand.
Hi. Yeah,
Hi.
I live in Hollywood, in Central Hollywood, and we have a lot of like luxury housing. We do have a fair bit of senior affordable housing in Hollywood, which is good, but we don't have enough affordable housing for low income, especially families and individuals that are making like really low income, like extremely low income individuals. Yeah.
Thank you, Tabitha. Yeah, quite a few people have talked about housing for families, housing for large families, and I'm wondering, is that I don't know, would you say that's 3 bedrooms and more? Is that what we're talking about here in terms of family housing?
I would say at least 2 bedrooms and more that are affordable.
Okay,
There's a lot of people with children who aren't able to get into affordable housing because there's just more like studios and 1 bedrooms out in the affordable market.
okay. Great, thank you. Who else? I'm going to look for another hand if somebody else would like to comment on the responses or add some more to the response that they typed in already. Hi, Anna, I see your hand.
Hi guys, I hope everyone's doing well. I am from Department on Disability and I would like to see more housing for disabled people. I wish there was like a Section 8 opening only for disabled people because they really need it. We have lots of clients that they really need it. So this
Okay.
is my opinion.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anna, would you make a distinction there between housing for people with mental or physical disabilities? I'm trying to.
I can say both.
Okay.
We have mental and physical,
Okay.
and they're having really hard time of finding like housing. They live with the families or with a roommate, and they really want to have their own space, but because of the prices and LA is expensive, they can't afford. Yeah.
Okay. Great. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Who else? Take another comment or two. Anybody else like to share? I see a counter response. I think someone had talked about landlords that aren't keeping their properties in good repair. Someone else mentioned that tenants may also bear some responsibility there for not keeping units in good condition. There's a comment here about more dense housing options. And so what might be single family parcels or properties, getting more density onto those to increase the number of housing units that are available. Anybody on any of those points like to share more?
I don't see any hands, but the comment about housing density seems like it might go back to your comment a little earlier about walkability and so having more things within the neighborhood.
Sure, yeah, that's a good connection. So that seems to be a value to many of you that are participating, having things nearby that you can walk to and get to. And of course, density is a part of that. And so we're seeing that reflected here too. They've scrolled off the screen, I think, but there were several comments too about there being, I think, enough luxury housing. There is housing if you can afford a lot or afford more housing is another new one. Anything other than luxury apartments. So I saw several of you mention that too.
And we had a comment in the chat about maybe some incompatibility. Sometimes, for example, if someone is working at home and they might be in an apartment community next to maybe a family with a lot of kids, lots of activity going on. So some concerns there, probably especially as more people are working from home now.
Yes, I can certainly see that comment. Thank you for sharing that. Okay. Not seeing any other hands. We can continue on. Okay. Well, thank you again, everyone, for taking time to share some of your ideas in that poll. So we're going to talk a little bit now about what the study we're working on will look like. The assessment of fair housing is an analysis of the fair housing landscape in the city of Los Angeles and a plan for how to expand fair housing through 2028. Under the federal AFH rule, all HUD grantees are required to complete a fair housing study every 5 years, demonstrating how they will affirmatively further fair housing, including actionable strategies for improving housing access and reducing barriers to opportunity. The AFH will include a variety of components. We'll be looking at demographics and patterns related to residential segregation, integration, and income. We'll identify areas of the city with high levels of racial segregation, including those with high levels of poverty and affluence. We'll also look at access to opportunities like schools, jobs, transit, and a clean environment, and whether everyone throughout the city has fair access to these types of resources. We'll consider housing costs and whether affordable housing need varies by protected class. We'll also look at public housing, tax credit developments, and other types of affordable housing. In other words, what is available and in what parts of the city is it? The AFH will include a focus on disability that considers whether people with all types of disabilities are able to find suitable housing in an area they choose. Finally, the study will include an overview of fair housing resources and activities provided by the city, housing authority, and other partner agencies. Community input, including the input that we are getting from you tonight, will help inform all aspects of this study. The City of LA recently prepared an assessment of fair housing for its 2021 to 2029 housing element that illustrates some of the things that will be in this AFH. For example, the city looked at housing affordability by race and ethnicity. The chart here shows what share of renters spend more than 1/2 of their income on housing, what we refer to as having a severe cost burden. About 37% of Black and 33% of Latinx renters spend more than 1/2 of their income on housing, compared to about 28% for white renters and 26% for Asian renters. So we can see that the ability to afford housing varies by race and ethnicity in LA, which is a fair housing issue that the AFH now underway will explore. Based on all the research, data collection, previous studies, and community input, the assessment of fair housing will identify fair housing issues in the city. For each issue, we'll outline the most significant causes and develop a series of goals and strategies to address them. The strategies need to be meaningful steps toward reducing fair housing issues, and every year, HUD will ask the city to report what achievements it has made toward meeting its fair housing goals. In addition to meeting state and federal requirements, the AFH will be very important as local leaders make decisions about housing policies and resources. It will be built on community input and is one way residents can voice their opinions to city and HACLA leadership. The study will advance past fair housing efforts, including the city's housing element and its previous assessment of fair housing from 2018. Ultimately, what will come out of the plan is an action-oriented strategy that can impact the city's decisions about how to spend the grant funds it receives for housing, community development, and homelessness. The strategies will also shape projects, programs, or policies by the city or HACLA. The final plan will be adopted by the City Council and HACLA leadership. It represents a commitment by the city and HACLA to implement activities that expand fair housing and stop future housing discrimination for all residents. So I'd like to share here a few examples of current fair housing efforts underway by the City of LA and its partners. Stay Housed LA helps prevent eviction through outreach to landlords and tenants and legal assistance to renters facing eviction. It's a collaboration between the city, Los Angeles County, and local legal service providers that began during the pandemic. It responds to the need for tenant protection, which was one of the contributing factors identified in the 2018 AFH and in the city's housing element. Another approach designed to improve fair housing for renters is the city's tenant anti-harassment ordinance. The law prohibits landlords from harassing tenants by removing housing services, ignoring repair requests, refusing to accept rent, or doing other things that interfere with a tenant's ability to enjoy their home in peace. Excuse me. The ordinance was one strategy outlined in the city's 2018 AFH to respond to displacement pressure and the lack of affordable housing. The housing element identifies education about the anti-harassment ordinance as a goal, and that outreach is currently underway by the city and its partners. You can see from this outline that we'll have many opportunities for public input during the AFH process. That includes this meeting and other similar community meetings that we will be holding this month, along with a series of stakeholder meetings and focus groups in January. We'll also have a survey open that we hope everyone will participate in, and we will have a link to that later in the meeting. In the spring, we'll want to hear from the community again to get feedback on the draft fair housing issues and strategies to address them. By the summer, we anticipate having a complete draft assessment of fair housing for the public to review. We'll then make any final revisions to prepare for an August approval by City Council and HACLA. At this point, I'd like to pause just to take any questions about any of the content that we've shared so far about the AFH or the process that we're using to develop it. If you have a question that you'd like to ask, you can please use the raise hand feature so that we can see you. Again, if you are joining by phone and would like to raise your hand, that's going to be *9. You can use *6 to mute and unmute. You can also put questions or comments in the chat. And I'll just say again, if we can't get to your question tonight, please leave some contact information in the chat as well, and we will be happy to follow up with you after the meeting. I do see a hand raised, Tabitha.
Yeah, so I noticed in the previous, or one of the slides about tenant harassment that you had an image that said tenant harassment was a crime, which is actually not. You have to take it up in civil court, which is one of like the big issues with why it's not enforceable, because low-income tenants don't have the means to pay for a lawyer. But my question is, will the AFH give recommendations like criminalizing tenant harassment to make ordinances like this enforceable and more effective throughout the city?
Yeah, thank you for that. Yes, I would say that is something that we will look at in the AFH. We'll look at existing programs, policies, ordinances, how well they're working, how effective they are, how they could be made more effective. I think that is something that that we will consider. I'm not sure if anybody else on Mosaics or the city's team wants to respond to that, or I can move on to SCDL Cook.
Yes, hello. My question is related to people with disabilities. It seems that, you know, when we're talking about disabilities, we sort of focus on physical and mental disabilities. However, when looking at the HUD regulations sort of identify physical and mental disabilities in one category, and they'll identify developmental disabilities in a separate category. Is there any concern or interest in expanding the work around folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities? Because they seem to have a disproportionate access to units when they're allocated for people with disabilities, because sometimes they don't have the wherewithal or the capacity to be able to access some of those resources. And so we're kind of trying to figure out what's going to be done in regards to that specific population.
Okay, so you're saying that that population, intellectual and developmental disabilities,
IDD,
have even less access to housing than other disabled populations. Is that
absolutely? Absolutely.
Okay. Well, yes, thank you for raising that. I think that is a population that we do include in our analysis. And so some of what we will look at is spatially, how these populations are located throughout the city, where there might be people of certain types of disability that cluster. We might want to look at why that might happen. But then I think also absolutely following from that would be access to resources, including housing, and how might that differ from other populations. Let's see. Tabitha, I see your hand again.
Yeah, I had another question.
Okay.
So are the findings of the AFH like binding? Like, is there a mechanism to hold the city accountable to meeting those goals? And what happens if they don't?
Sure, that's a great question. So the AFH will conclude with a set of strategies that the city, and when it goes to the city council to be adopted, so they will be signing on to those strategies. The accountability component behind the AFH is in an annual report that the city sends to HUD. So the city annually certifies that it will affirmatively further fair housing, and then every year the city has to report to HUD on how well it has done at that job. And part of that report then is looking at the recommendations or the strategies contained in the AFH and reporting to HUD on how it has progressed in terms of executing those. That annual report is a public document called the Consolidated Annual Performance and Evaluation Report. That's something that the city advertises, posts on its website each year. I'm not sure at what point in the year, maybe someone from the city staff could add to that, but that would be the accountability piece behind the AFH.
Does anything happen if they don't meet the goals or the implementation of the strategies?
Yeah, so if the city is not following through on the strategies that are contained there, a couple of things could happen. HUD could decide to withhold grant funds that it provides to the city. That's kind of the primary leverage that HUD would have. I think the city would also open itself up to individual residents or organizations could file complaints with HUD or even lawsuits and say the city's not doing not fulfilling the certification that it made, saying that it would affirmatively further fair housing. So if that were the case, there's opportunities like that. We have seen that happen before in some other communities. Hopefully, that's not the strategy that has to be taken, but that is one possibility.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tabitha. I see Philip's hand.
Yeah, hi, thank you. Yes, I was very interested in the housing element process this time, and in the it's an 8-year cycle, and in the previous one, they had requirement or targets for how many affordable and how many market rate apartments they were going to build or units, and they built 300% or like 298% of the target for market rate units, and they only built about 24% of the affordable units. And in the next cycle, I think they're only projecting that they will get 20% of the affordable units. So basically, we're nowhere near meeting the need, and because of the length of the covenants, every year, some covenants are expiring on affordable units, and so in other words, we may not even be keeping up with the attrition rate. And so, basically at that rate, we would never have any probability of building enough affordable housing. And so I'm just wondering, in other words, it seems great to have, all these plans and so forth, but if there isn't actually housing, then, people with vouchers are not going to be able to find housing. All those severely rent burdened people are not going to see their situation improve either. So I'm just wondering if that's something that is intended to be addressed by this visit, by this process.
Thank you, Philip. I think that's a great question and a great point that you've made too. As much as you might see affordable housing going up, you're always losing affordable housing units at the same time. The affordability restrictions that get applied to those expire at some point in a lot of cases. And those units that were built 15, 20 years, maybe 30 years ago might at some point be lost from the city's affordable housing inventory. So it's important to keep up with that. And of course, you want to expand the affordable housing units. I think that is a really important issue and is something that the AFH will explore further. I think, Carla, you've had your hand up.
Maybe before we go on, it looks like Maya might want to add a
Oh,
comment.
sure. Okay.
Oh, I can just add really briefly. I know sometimes it's hard to participate in all these plans when we know that one of the most dire needs is getting production up. But in this case, if we don't submit our plan, if we don't have a good plan that makes it through council, that everyone is in agreement with, then we can't access the funds from the federal government that help us to build the housing. So it is really important. This is a critical plan that will help us to get to production. And I think now that we have more funding from the recent proposition from ULA, we may see differences in trends, and this plan will really help us to create an outline of what kinds of projects are we investing in, where in the city are we targeting investment. And so it's a really exciting time to be working on this.
Good point. Thank you, Maya. Yeah, so having completed this study is a precondition of the city's receipt of tens of millions in future federal funding for affordable housing. Thanks for pointing that out. Carla, let's go to you.
Thank you. So my question pertains to the rent moratorium that just occurred during COVID. So my building was not protected concerning any rent increases, maybe because it wasn't an RSO. I believe the building was built after the 80s. So it didn't seem fair that rent increases were halted for the buildings that were a little older. Yet we received, or I received, rent increases during COVID also. And I'm wondering if that issue will be explored so that it will be fair to all, because it didn't feel very fair. I appreciate everything LA City Housing does, but being under the special programs, that did not seem fair because we all suffered an income loss, but yet our building got a rent increase and others didn't. So will that be explored in the future in case there's another pandemic, which I hope not?
Thank you. Yes. Melissa, would you like to take a stab at that response? I know you're more familiar with some of the aspects of the city's programs.
So I think that we will kind of review the different programs that the city has had in place. So kind of on a regular basis, but also in response to the pandemic, and look at ways that those could possibly be improved, or there's opportunities to expand on them. I think that's something that we will consider as part of the study. I don't know if anyone from the city wants to add anything on that comment either.
I can just add briefly that in the housing element, one of our programs that was related to fair housing was around just cause, passing a just cause ordinance, which isn't the same as rent control for our newer units that aren't covered by RSO, but would provide additional protections and relocation assistance. And so that's being considered by council and would likely also be included in this as a recommendation if it's not passed by the time that we adopt. Or if it is passed, then the implementation and how we think about implementing it. I see also there's a comment about Costa-Hawkins. I think the strategies typically, and Nancy chime in too, have focused on what the city can do. And so the city often has positions on state bills, but I think we're really going to focus on what is within the realm of city policy and practices.
Yes, that is correct. That is going to be our focus, based off of, you know, again, this is the AFH is something that will go before our city council to for their review and approval. So this would be an adoption for something that will be under the city's oversight, right? So we'll just be focused on the city's jurisdiction. But in regards to the rent increases and why it's, you know, it does not cover those that are not under the RSO. And as Maya mentioned, we don't yet have a just cause ordinance in place. But our department is responsible for the RSO and administering the RSO. So therefore there are protections for those who are in RSO properties specifically. And we do have renter protections information on our site, which I'll share in the chat, which includes limits on rent increases, and particularly that is something that was there was that moratorium in place during this COVID moratorium that we have. But as we expand further in terms of what we're doing beyond RSO, there will be that chance at being able to have protections for those who are not in, or additional protections for those who do not reside in RSO property. So that is the intent of the department, and that is something that we're moving closer towards. So hopefully that is something that also that will be, it's important for us to also further you know, emphasize the need of this and the goal of this in our AFH, and actually putting forth particular perhaps milestones in terms of when we plan to get there.
Thank you.
I see a couple more hands. I want to try to get to both of you, Matt, and then I think Bree. West would be next. Matt?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Great. Hey, so two general comments. I've always found that a plan is only as good as its execution. And for this quest to be successful, I think it's important to embrace the private sector if you've ever got a shot at actually overcoming the housing issues in the city of Los Angeles. And I would love to, in this quest this time, people reach out and make an attempt to treat the housing providers as partners instead of the enemy. And just even today, listening to some of the words and sort of the approaches, I would urge you deeply, if you truly believe you're trying to solve the problem, to try to figure out how to embrace them, because they are living, breathing people just like all of us and doing the same thing. And for full disclosure, I own a 4-unit building in the city of Los Angeles. And, you know, just responding to the person on the other end who said, oh, golly gee, it's not fair that I had my rent increase. I haven't been able to increase my rent all during COVID. Just alone, my insurance bill went from $1,800 to $9,200 a year because of the riots. They said that I was in an unsafe neighborhood, and therefore that's what it would cost to insure the building. And I can't recoup any of it from anybody. And I'm a retired old man who relies on it for my income. So I'm here because I believe in all the same things you guys do. And yet when I listen to you talk about landlords, you almost approach it as we're all evil, bad people. And I deeply urge you, if this is going to really, truly be successful, to think that maybe, just maybe, some landlords are trying to achieve the same thing you are and figure out a way to embrace them instead of make them all evil people. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Absolutely. Landlords, developers, property management companies are certainly crucial stakeholders. There will be a separate kind of phase of engagement where we're working with people who are professionals within the housing sector. That will happen early next year, I believe. But that is certainly our intention, to incorporate other points of view from people who are working in that aspect of the field. I hope I have your name right. Is it Bree West? Go ahead.
It is Bree. Hi.
Hi.
So I'd like to echo and elaborate a little bit more on the young lady that just spoke before, the manager, apartment manager who just spoke. I agree with both, but I will say, speaking of the larger buildings, it is a shock to receive a 10% increase during a time where nobody's working. And I think that the larger buildings, a lot of them may have gotten some grant money or whatever that was going around during these hard times. And so, yes, it does feel like, well, geez, can we all get above water? So it's a balance to me. We know that you need your rent, but we also need to survive too. So I feel like it's a balance. I do not believe management is evil, but I do believe it's a balance. Okay, what I'm really saying is, on a bigger note, I just wanted to respond to that, but on a bigger note, I think a lot of times when we're on programs, the information is just kept away from us, right? We don't even know what our program consists of. When I first moved to my building, we were under CRA-LA. They were wonderful. We had all the information. We had a point of contact person. We knew exactly who to, call or email if anything happened. And it was great. And literally the rent was raised the next year, and it was raised too much. I emailed the person and they said, yes, they're only able to raise the rent between 1% and 3%. I don't know if that was specific to our program or what, but the building had to refund us all the extra money that they charged us, right? Now it feels like we have no point of contact, nobody to consult with, to understand what it's like. Even if we didn't get our money back, just understand what we're on. These things are changing, and we're made to feel like we are enemies and we are like prisoners, really. Like, you don't deserve this information. You got to pay for the information. You got to pay to get the covenant printed out and all of this. It's really ridiculous. I feel like if things are being updated and switched around, then that is the first thing that should go out to the tenants. It should go out to the owners of the buildings, and the owners of the buildings should be made to give that information to the tenants. Again, nobody's trying to get over on anybody, but we should be able to know what program we're on when things change, and know how to deal with that accordingly. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I'm understanding. So if you're on some sort of a voucher or an assistance or a rental program, it's important to have good lines of communication with whoever is administering and funding that program, so that you know when there might be changes in the structure of how that's operated. Am I hearing you correctly?
Yes, yes. The technical information when it changes, even limits every year. The limits change. Well,
Okay.
what are they?
Well, thank you. Go ahead.
Sorry. But yes, you basically have what I'm saying, the gist of it. Because I will tell you this, I have been trying to get a contact person for 3 years now from my office, and they just keep saying they don't know anything. They don't know anything. They don't know anything. And I finally found your contact through literally calling around hours. It's just, it's pretty ridiculous. So yeah, I would like to see that change. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Bree. Appreciate that. If there's any follow-up that you would like from the city, if you have contact information that you'd like to drop into the chat, or you can send it directly to me or one of the other facilitators if you'd prefer, but we can add you to the list for follow-up after the meeting. I'm not sure if it's the city or HACLA that is who you're trying to get in touch with and find out more information on, but if it is, we can make that happen. Okay.
I think we had one question that came up in the chat during the presentation that I just wanted to answer, and then I think we can move on to continue with the meeting. It was a question, I think, about related to housing affordability and whether that takes into account income. And yes, it does. So that measure is looking both at the person's or the household's housing costs and also their household income. So what percentage of their income are they spending on housing? So it's if you have higher housing costs, your housing burden will go up. If you have a lower income, your housing burden might go up as well. So just wanted to answer that, but I think I don't see any other hands, so we can maybe move to the next question.
Sure, yeah. And the next portion here is some more input from you. So I want to thank you for the questions about the content of the presentation. So what I wanted to talk about now is we shared a little bit about some of the city's fair housing initiatives, things like Stay Housed LA, the anti-harassment law that helps protect renters. We'd like to hear from you what sorts of programs or agencies or services you're familiar with in the city. Organizations that are doing work to protect housing rights or provide fair housing education. If you feel like you've been discriminated against, you would contact, call, look up this agency or organization for help. We want to get a sense of what the degree of information is out there in the community. What organizations do you know of? Who would you go to? Who would you refer someone to if they came to you for help? So take a moment. This is going to be another Slido question. So slido.com. The code is 3606379. And this will be another word cloud question. So as people add responses here, they'll populate on the screen. The more times an organization or agency is mentioned, the larger we will see it appear. So just again, I see some people starting to type here, Stay Housed LA, the Housing Rights Center. I would also say if you aren't familiar with anybody that does this sort of work, it's important for us to know that too. So it's fine if you want to go to the Slido and say, I don't know, nobody comes to mind. That information is helpful too. So if you don't know of anybody, let us know that. Okay, someone added the Apartment Owners Association and the Affordable Housing Registry. Thank you for those answers. Some of the, so Stay Housed LA we talked about. I'm not sure if anybody who added one of the other responses here, or there's still more coming in. But if anybody would like to share what you know about the organization you typed in, anybody want to add more about the Housing Rights Center and what they do, or any of the others, the Affordable Housing Registry, the Apartment Owners Association, and I see someone saying that they're unfamiliar with any types of fair housing services. But yeah, anybody want to share an organization that you do know about and what they do? Philip.
Hi, regarding the Affordable Housing Registry, I've been interested in it for a while, and it was at one time it was like a private entity was hosting the Affordable Housing Registry, and then they moved it to a government platform. But so in other words, like the idea is that you should be able to find any unit of affordable housing in LA on that registry, but they don't have the mixed income projects, which include market rate housing, and they get a density bonus or transit-oriented communities incentives in return for setting aside a certain number of units as affordable. And those units, as of my latest information, are not in the registry.
Okay. How well do you think the wider community knows of that registry? Is that something that the average person, when they're looking for affordable housing, might know of and would use as a resource?
Well, that's the place that people are supposed to go to look for affordable housing.
Okay.
In my understanding.
Okay. So that would be pretty widely known within the community. Who else? Do you feel like the organizations that you see here, are these organizations that you are familiar with? Are they organizations you think your neighbors are familiar with? Maybe an additional question around that. What could the city or these organizations do to better get the word out about the types of housing services they provide? We do have quite a few new ones that are added to the screen here. I see Western Center, Quantum Housing Corp, Power LA. There is an acronym I'm not familiar with, AAGLA, maybe .org. Anybody want to expound on any of those? DL Cook, I see you.
Yes, I was responding on the Quantum Housing Corp. They primarily focus on connecting affordable housing units and other resources for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. They work in partnership with the California Regional Center System, and there are 7 regional centers here in LA County, and they work with, I believe, about 4 or 5 of those regional centers that are all connected here in the city of Los Angeles. So those individuals with IDD have a central resource where they can go to connect to affordable housing. But the challenge that Quantum has is there's not a lot of resources specifically for folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So, but I wanted to bring them up and everything to share that information.
I appreciate that. Thank you for adding that up. Matt, yes.
Yeah, hey, I'm struck by how many different names there are and how many different places there are. And I guess my suggestion would be to
Matt, I don't hear you.
As you go through this process, perhaps the city could give some incentive to landlords to place all their places in one location. Because as a landlord, I look at this and I'm like, okay, I don't know which organization to go to tell them I have a subsidized or a lower income apartment to offer. There's so many of them. And it would be great if there was one central database that the city controlled that says, everybody go here, and there's some incentive to do that. And then all these little groups could work off of the database, but it's overwhelming as a guy who's just trying to rent this apartment to some willing, good person at a good price. I don't know where the hell to go. Thank you.
Sure. So maybe more of a central organization where if you have a apartment unit for rent, you could let folks know about it, an affordable unit.
Yeah, because it seems to be organized around the tenants in this case. And if you organized around the available units and then brought the tenants to the list of available units, that might be work better than doing it. We're doing it the reverse right now. At least it looks like it by the number of names on the piece of paper.
Thank you.
So I want to comment on that one. And I won't speak for HACLA, but probably start off by just saying I believe HACLA and Patty or Norma can speak to this. HACLA has been working with owners to try to incentivize them to rent to those who are low income and those who are voucher holders. And perhaps I don't know in terms of how that list is maintained in terms of those owners who are willing and who have units available for tenants who qualify to be able to share that list and to be on that list. So I don't know if HACLA is able to give any information about that, if there's a need or there's a way for you to become connected with them in that way. So I don't know if anyone from HACLA wants to speak about that in terms of being able to, if there's a list, how is that maintained, or even just the ongoing collaboration that you have with landlords in efforts to try to incentivize them to rent to those who are low income and who have vouchers.
Hi, this is Patricia Mendoza with HACLA with the Section 8 program. As Nancy mentioned, yes, the Housing Authority conducts a lot of outreach to landlords So on a regular basis, they conduct landlord orientations, and also the housing authority is offering an incentive to landlords that are willing to rent to Section 8 participant families. So you can send me your contact information through the chat, and we can reach out to you. But because yes, we have a unit that is doing landlord outreach. I mean, the housing authority right now, we have more than 4,000 voucher holders searching for units in this tight rental market. So that is also one of the reasons that we are offering an incentive to landlords as well to rent to the program participants.
Thanks, Nancy and Patty.
Yes, and one more other comment is that we do have affordable housing registry with the LAHD, and that is something that includes what particular units are accessible for those who are looking for, who are interested in finding housing. And so that's posted based off of where those units are in terms of availability in the city, and particularly the ones in which we're tracking and we're monitoring. But there is a need for us to expand that registry, that so there is a larger database that includes affordable housing units in the city, outside of just those that are considered to be accessible. So there is a need to expand that, and we talked about that in terms of ways to, there's a need for us to do that, and also to really help with our marketing as well, and to help landlords market the availability of their units. And so that is something, one of the things that the department is talking about, and is a very key aspect of this work, because it's not just in terms of the tenants who are seeking housing, but also the landlords, right, who have available housing, who want to be able to fill those units with low-income individuals and be able to help house them. So there is definitely a need on both ends. So that is one of the key things that we have been talking about, and I think is important also to for us to remember in terms of, as we talk about goals for the AFH that's going to come out of it, that being one of them, to really be able to put things in place so we can ensure that that's something that is developed, and again, further expand the registry that we currently have, because there's definitely a need for both sides in terms of being able to have that central place to be able to go to, one, to search for housing, and then even also for landlords to even post available housing units.
Great.
That's good. I was going to make one observation before we move off of this slide, and that's that we came up with a lot of names, or you did anyway. And so I think that's really good. There is a response from someone who said they were not familiar, and maybe some others were not familiar either. But once we really stopped and thought about it, many of you were able to come up with lots of different organizations too that are doing work in this sector. And I think that's important to point out. I think we'll move on now. We might have time for one more. This is sort of a general sort of discussion question. It's not a Slido question. Getting into more about housing discrimination. So I wanted to ask a question about to what degree do you think housing discrimination happens in your neighborhood in the city of LA? Is it something that you hear frequently about? Is it something that you have experienced yourself? And what does discrimination most frequently look like? What forms does it take? So this is, again, not a Slido question. If you'd like to share a response to that, just raise your hand. We'll call on you, and we'd be happy to hear your input. Tabitha, I see you.
Yes, hi. So I actually work for Power LA, which is one of the CBOs that is part of State House. So every kind of housing discrimination we run into all the time. I would say the main one is people with records whether they be criminal records, previous eviction records, things like that. It's really, really hard. Low credit scores, really hard to get them into housing. Source of income discrimination is extremely common. If you're not making like 3 times the rent, that's also really common. If you're like income discrimination on how high it is, even though you're making enough money to pay the rent. Like I've worked with tenants who I've helped them apply to apartments where the rent is lower than what they're paying now. And despite that fact that they've like been paying the rent at a place where it's higher rent, landlords still won't accept them because their income isn't high enough or they don't like trust where it's coming from. Every once in a while we run into racial discrimination, although I think that one's a little less common than a lot of the different kinds of income discrimination that I have seen at least.
Okay, that's good information. Thank you. And from someone who unfortunately sees a lot of it. Who else? Would anybody else like to respond to that? How prevalent do you think housing discrimination is in your part of the city? Maybe also I'll add this to the question. Are there things that you would like to see the city or the housing authority doing to reduce that discrimination, to address it? I see Tabitha's response in the chat says to criminalize it.
Yeah, because they're all civil matters. And like most people who are being discriminated against don't have the means to go to court about this.
Yeah, I think that is often the case. It can take a long time for a lawsuit to play itself out. And in the meantime, you just needed a place to live, right? Okay. So any more thoughts around the types of discrimination? I think, Tabitha, your response is really interesting there because you talked about a lot of income-based types of discrimination that you see, source of income and things like that. And then you mentioned, I think, toward the end that you do occasionally see discrimination based on race, less prevalent maybe than some of those other forms. And a lot of us, I think, tend to think of housing discrimination as most frequently happening along a racial or ethnic sort of basis. And I think that probably isn't what actually happens on the ground. Matt, do you want to share on that?
Yeah, no, I was going to talk to the economic one because my guess is that probably happens most. And I guess what I would suggest, and I don't have a good solution, which is how can you take some of the risk away from a landlord from taking the risk on a tenant who might have bad credit or, you know, all the various things you guys have all articulated, which are completely valid. And as a landlord, you look at it and go, oh, I don't know, right? And because if there was a way, if it didn't work out, that it wasn't as an arduous a process for the landlord who took the risk versus a landlord who doesn't take a risk on that kind of tenant and goes with the safe tenant and has to go through the various steps for eviction or whatever else. Is there a way that you can reward the landlord who takes the risk in a way that if it doesn't work out, he doesn't go through the same process as a guy who never took the risk? Just a suggestion. Do you know what I'm saying? It's kind of an incentive to say, hey, you know, go ahead and try. And if it doesn't work out, we're not going to kill you on the back end. Because right now, you know, there's this whole buttress work to keep the tenant in place. So as a landlord, why take that risk if you're going to get killed on the back end? That's all. Just a suggestion.
Okay. Sure. Yeah, I think I have seen in some places like risk pools to support landlords who are willing to house tenants who might be difficult to place in housing. And so if they do leave the landlord in a bad situation, there has been some sort of a fund set up that supports landlords in that sort of position. So that might be something worth looking into. But maybe there are other ideas out there as well. Tabitha, I wanted to say I did see. No, you're still here. I saw your comment in the chat connecting the economic issues to issues of race and ethnicity, and I appreciate you making that clear for us as well. I think that is obviously a very important aspect of fair housing and important to our analysis. So thank you for mentioning that.
We might have time for one more comment if anyone has one last thing to say. Otherwise, I think I can move the presentation forward.
Okay. Yeah, if there's one last comment, love to hear it. And if not, we will start wrapping up.
I'll hop this forward.
Well, again,
maybe I'll add one thing. I think this group is really solutions focused, which is really great to see. We are still kind of in this listening phase of our project. And so, we can't fully respond to like, what is the city doing or how will this be framed as a strategy? Because we're just not there yet. But I think if there's specific issues or solutions that you're interested in, feel free to email us at that email address that we provided, and we can be in touch and kind of dialogue and thinking specifically about, sorry for the crying baby in the background, but specifically thinking about things like landlord-tenant issues or about housing people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Like, we want to be able to have those kind of conversations with you and think through the solutions more. Again, this is just kind of our listening phase of things.
Yes, and thanks for saying that, Maya. And this is also the I guess the beginning of our conversations that we're going to be having. As mentioned, we are, we have a lengthy timeline in terms of other things to do during this AFH process. And so there will be stakeholder meetings taking place as well. And perhaps that's another time when we can really dive in to thoughts and ideas that everyone has. And those stakeholder meetings will be with folks who are the service providers, who are actually serving those who are tenants, and through various means, those who own properties, those who are fair housing advocates, those who work in affordable housing, and various other types of industries. So we will be having those come up as well at the beginning of the year. So if you are interested in participating in those particular sessions, or even just want to remain updated in regards to that meeting and other meetings, please email us at our email account, which we'll share in the chat. And then also please visit our webpage, because our webpage will have ongoing updates about additional meetings that we're having and the progress that we're making through this time of us continuing our AFH work.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy and Maya too for making those additional comments. Some of the solutions and the ideas that you are mentioning are helpful, even at this early stage, just because they prompt us to kind of make a note that this is something that, as the study progresses, we'll need to look into. So I want to say that we just really appreciate all of the insights, the ideas that you've shared with us this evening, and we'll be taking that into account. Over the next couple of weeks, we will be updating the city's AFH website. You see that on the slide here in front of you. It's housing.lacity.org/residents/assessment of fair housing, with hyphens between those last words. The information that we will put up on that site will include summaries about what we heard from you tonight, and also in the other community meetings that we've been holding all month. So if you'd like to see what your fellow Angelinos shared, you can visit that site to check that out. You can also continue to participate in meetings over the next few weeks, and we encourage you to invite friends, colleagues, if there are people that you know who you think would have been interested in this meeting but couldn't make it tonight. There are 2 left, and so you see the meeting information there. You can also use the QR code on this slide to get to the city's fair housing or assessment of fair housing page. The more people that participate in the process and in this project, the better the outcome and the strategies are going to be. So we do hope that you'll help us spread the word. I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting that we had a survey available as well. And there are actually two surveys. There's one for the general public. There's a second survey available if you are a representative of an organization that's engaged in housing or social services. And so we hope that you would take those surveys. That is another valuable way to get input from people who might not be able to take time out to join a meeting. So please feel free to share those links. We would love to have as many people take the surveys as possible. And finally, we've mentioned this before, but the email address, lahd.afhpolicy@lacity.org. If you have questions directly for us, you can send those there. Or if you want to sign up for our mailing list so that you can be informed of future opportunities to participate in the AFH process, just drop your name and email into the chat. You can do that now, or you can send us an email later. Again, that address, you see it on the screen, lahd.afhpolicy@lacity.org. And I'll turn it back over to Nancy then to finish us up.
Yes, again, we'd like to thank everyone for your time this evening and offering your ideas. They have been very helpful, and it's been a great conversation. Your voice is helping to make this a stronger study that will shape fair housing access in LA for years to come. Please take note of the project's website link and email address in the chat box to stay engaged. We do look forward to seeing you again as work on the project progresses. And also, before we go, seems like we have a pretty good number of folks here. We would like to ask everyone to turn on your cameras if you feel, if you don't mind doing so. We can take a screenshot of all attendees. This would be great for us to share for our social media posts and for other updates about our AFH work. I know it's unexpected. Everyone's getting camera ready, hopefully. We just want to take a quick screenshot. Okay, great. All right, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night.